Hey guys, how's it going? I'm back here with another video, and today I'm really excited because this is a video that a lot of people have been requesting me. Basically, in this video we're going to be making an authentication system using Json Web Tokens, and this is a topic that a lot of people are wanting to know, and a lot of people have been requesting me because I believe it is one of the most important topics that you can master. Using Json Web Tokens is really important because it allows you to authenticate and verify if a user who is really who they say they are. So if you don't know, the difference between authorization and authentication is very simple. Authorization is basically what we did over here, and this is a small project that I had before. It's just a simple registration and login system. When you register a username and a password, the username and password sends the information to a database. As you can see right here, it's a MySQL database, and it also encrypts, like it hashes the password whilst it's sending. And yeah, this is basically the system, so that when we log in, when we put the same information over here and log in, it will look to see if the password and username we inputted exists in the database, and if it exists, it will say you're logged in. This is called authorization. Basically, it allows us, it checks to see if there's a user in our database that exists with the same combination. Whilst authentication is something a bit different, because when you are going to make an API request, you really want to make sure that who's making that API request is the person who are able to receive that information. If I want to get a request that returns, for example, my password or sensitive information, I want to make sure that the user making that request is the same user that should be receiving that information. So we use something called Json Web Tokens, which is a way to authenticate the user. And in order to do that, I would come here to our project, and you can see we're using React and Node. And by the way, I know that half of the basic idea of a registration and login system are already in place here. You can see right here, I already did this. This was done in the previous two videos because I had two videos explaining how to make a simple registration and login system, how to encrypt and not encrypt, but how to hash passwords and how to use cookies and all that kind of stuff. But it's really not necessary to watch that video to watch this one, because this one is focused on authentication, and authentication is something very different from authorization. So I'll try to separate what I'm doing in this video from what I did previously, because you can see we have a simple program right here. You can see I'm using sessions. I already have some endpoints, and that's not necessary. That you don't need to understand what these are, because I'm going to explain everything. And by the way, before we go and start talking about Json Web Tokens, I would really appreciate if you guys could leave a like, because I'm posting every single day while I'm in college, so I'm putting a lot of effort and time into this channel, and I'm really liking it. So I would really appreciate if you guys could leave a like and subscribe so I can continue posting. So the first thing we want to do is we want to install a package called Json Web Tokens. So you can see I have two terminals right here. This is for the backend, so I'm even going to close it. This is from the front end, and we're going to go here to the server, so the backend folder right here, and we're going to write yarn add Json Web Token. I already installed it, but it's basically like this. If you're using npm, then it's just npm install Json Web Token, and you should be fine. After you install this, you want to require the Json Web Token library over here. So we're going to go to the top, and right below this, by the way, as I mentioned, you can ignore most of this if you didn't watch my previous videos. It is not necessary. So down here, you can see we can just come and say const JWT, which stands for Json Web Tokens, and require Json Web Token. And now we have an instance of this package, and we can take use of that. So the basic idea is that whenever a user logs in, we want to create a token that is related to the ID of the user. So for example, this ID right here. And we're going to keep track of what that token is, because while the user is logged in, we're going to be using that token to make every API request. And every API request, be it that the user wants to get, for example, his profile picture, or the user wants to get his name, then every single API request we want to verify to see if the user who is making the request has the same web token as the user who should be making the request. So the first thing we want to do is we want to go to the login route So as I mentioned before, this was done before. We have a post request, which is called /login, which basically grabs the username and password that the user put over here, and it makes a query, like it makes a select request for our MySQL database, basically asking if the username is equal to that. If it is, then it wants to encrypt the password that we sent so that it will compare it to the password in the database, and if the username and password compares, meaning that the user is correctly logged in, then it basically creates a session and for the user, basically saying that the user is logged in, and it sends the results, which basically currently is the username, the password, is everything related to the user. So this is what we're doing right now. But we want to add some logic inside of here, which will allow us to create a Json Web Token every time that the user logs in. The basic logic will be as follows. The first thing we want to do is we want to grab the ID of the user. You can see that at the top we are selecting all from users, where username is equal to the username that we're going to that we inputted over here. But when I say all, I mean everything. We're also getting this ID, and this is what we want. So we can come here and write const ID equals to result. And since our result returns an array, since we can select multiple users, we can just say that we want the first user from that array, and then we can just say ID. This is simple. This is just what we did before. Like you can see, the reason why we're putting 0 over here is because every query request, like every time you select something from a database, it assumes it may return various, like a lot of different rows. And this time we're only returning one because there's only one username and password combination that is the same. But still we need to access the first element in that return. And we're accessing the ID. Why do we want the ID? Well, we're going to create our token based on that. So we can come here and write const token and equals to JWT dot sign. And this is how we're going to create it. Right over here we can pass the ID. So we're passing the ID, and then we can pass a secret. And this is really important. You don't want to just write, for example, JWT secret. I'm going to do this for this video because it doesn't really matter at all for me. But if you're going to publish if you want to publish an application with this, you definitely want to use .env files. You're going to create a .env variable and just put this right there. If you don't know what a .env variable is, it's something extremely important for any application. But you probably should know. You probably already know, because this is something that we start learning in the beginning. Because it is important that we don't publish stuff with variables that contain secret information. So I just put JWT secret over here, and then we can just pass an object, and this object will contain some information about our tokens. For example, when we want our token to expire. So when I say expires in, we can just pass a value over here. I'm gonna pass 300, which corresponds to 5 minutes. I just always put it like this. You can check what this values correspond to in terms of real time, and I would recommend 5 minutes. That's a good amount of time in my opinion, and that should be it. Right here at the bottom, we want to finish with authenticate, like setting the session just like we did before. So this is something that if you're not currently using sessions, then don't worry that much, but this is something that we want to do. And yeah, that's basically it. The only thing I want to do left, like the only thing I need to do left is basically when we created our token, we logged in, we want to send that token to the front end. So for example, before we were just sending the result. And remember that the result is all the information from the user that is trying to log in. But now we want to change a bit. We want to send, for example, we want to send a JSON instead of just normal send. And we want to pass an object, a JSON object that contains the following information. The first thing is we want to pass if the user is authenticated. So let's say that the user actually is authenticated. Because if it is, like if we got to this point, then it means it is authenticated. Then no, I actually don't mean authenticated. I mean authorized. So the user created the token. Then we got to pass the token, and let's pass the token that we just created. So token, and finally I want to pass, just like we were doing before, all of the results. So basically all of the information from the user, including the ID, including the username, including even the password in this case, but I wouldn't recommend passing the password to the front end, but this is just what we're doing. We're passing everything, like we're gonna pass everything over here from the user who just tried to log in. And in order to do that, we're gonna pass result right here, and that should be fine. Okay, so the next thing we want to do is we want to make it so that we just created an instance so that when you log in to an account, you create a token. But now we're not doing anything related to authentication yet. This is just creating the token. When we want to work with authentication, we want to authenticate whenever we're trying to make an API request. For example, let's imagine we're here in the front end, and whenever you log in, a button appears saying get user info. And that get user info will return a message saying, hey, you are authenticated. The reason for that is because we just want to create a test API request that is just going to check if the web token is correct, and if it is, it will say you are authenticated. If it is not, it will say you're not authenticated. So let's do that. Let's come right here and create app.get. We're going to create a request called user info. For example, no, let's just say is user authenticated. This is a horrible name, but let's just leave it like this. Then we want to pass. Initially, we don't want to, we want to pass a middleware right here, and I'll explain exactly what I mean by that. But then we want to pass, like always, the rec, res, and let's even pass a next. Actually, let's not pass a next. Let's just create a function right here, and down here, let's just say that if it is, then we want to res.send. I don't know, like yo, you are authenticated. Congrats, something like that. So the idea of this is an endpoint, right? This is basically asking, we're going to make a request to this endpoint in the front end. However, the difference between this endpoint and every other endpoint in our project is that we're going to apply a middleware right here called verify JWT. We haven't created it yet, but we're going to create it right now. This is a middleware that it's going to, whenever we call this endpoint, we're going to verify if the user making trying to reach this endpoint has the correct web token. And whenever if you're going to use JSON Web Tokens, you want to apply this middleware to every other request, because every request is sensitive. Like every request that sends information that really needs to be sensitive. So you're always going to apply the same middleware. And we're going to create that middleware right now. The first thing we want to do is, let's just create it over here. Like, it doesn't matter. It just needs to be, you just need to create it above where you make your request. So I would actually create it at the top, but currently I'll just write it over here. So what we want to do is we want to write const verify JWT, and then we want to pass rec, like it's a function, so rec, and res, and let's also say next, and at the end, let's just create the function. So the idea of this function is that we're going to authorize if the user is allowed. So let's initially just write const. First, let's get the token. So equals to rec dot headers and access token. So we're grabbing the token right here, and right afterwards we're gonna say if token. So if token, wait, let me write it correctly. If not token, we're basically asking if there isn't any token. We're going to res.send a message saying, yo, we need a token. Please give it to us next time. And you might already have seen, like, we're grabbing the token from the headers. This is something important. If you're working with JSON Web Tokens, you don't want to pass it directly on the request. You want to pass it through the headers. So this is how we're going to actually send it. And I'm going to show you guys on the front end how that works. But if the not token, then we want to send that. But if there is a token, if we actually have a token being sent to us, then let's just say that we want to verify. So JWT.verify, and inside of here we want to pass the token. We want to pass the secret that we created. For example, I think it is JWT secret. Then maybe we want to pass a function. So we want to pass a function that will first ask if there was any error verifying, and then we will try to pass something called decoded, which will allow us to decode our token. And this is a function, so let's come down right here. And inside of here, what we want to say is if there is any error, so if there is any error, then we want to say that it failed to authenticate. So res.send, let's actually pass an object. So JSON, let's pass it similar to what we had before. So let's just say something like auth equals to false, and let me see, maybe a message. So just like we had before, you failed to authenticate. And if there isn't any error, meaning that the token is correctly verified, it is the same person, so it is like everything is okay, then we want to rack.user ID equal to decoded ID. And I'm going to explain what this means. The basic idea is that when we want to make a request further in our project, we want to actually save to see if we want to save the decoded ID into a variable called user ID, for example. You could call it whatever you want, but this is just so that we don't need to verify every time that we want to make a request. So this is just saving the token, and it means that like the ID, and it means that we're going to be able to make authenticated requests further in our project. But the next thing we want to do is we actually want to work with like verifying to see if this is the correct user in the front end. So for example, let's come here to our app.js, and this is a React application, as you can see right here. And currently we just have a simple application, like I mentioned before. There's like an input asking for username registration, a password registration, a username to log in, a password to log in, and then a button so that you can log in. And at the bottom it says login status. Login status is basically the username. I should have chosen a different name, but it's just the username of the user. If the login status is equal to nothing, which is how it starts, then it means the user is not logged in. But if I came here and, for example, I tried to log in, I would say this is an account, like this is a user I created. Its username is Pedro5280 and the password is 5280, and I click login. Then let's see what the console log says. It says connection refused. We actually don't have I know what it means. Basically, we need to restart our server. So node index.js. It says running server. We start it again. Let me click again. You're going to see that nothing was console logged, but in our backend, you can see in our network, it says login is equal to true. And you can see that what is sent through the backend, this is what we received when we tried login. We received a JSON with a variable called auth equal to true, a result which is all of our information, for example, the username, the ID, the password, the username, as you can see right here, and we also received a token. And this is what we're going to be using. This is the important part of everything. This is the token that we got. So this is the basic idea, right? We received everything when we make a login, as we mentioned before. So this means it's working. Let's come here to our project right here, and let's start working on the process of sending the correct header to any authentication request we want to make. So let's create after you log in, for example. So after you log in, I'm going to come right here. I'm going to change this. I'm going to ask if login status is equal to it's actually not equal to this. And maybe should this matter? Actually no, I'm gonna change something. Login status should be a boolean. This is boolean saying true or false. So it starts as false. It's basically asking if you're logged in or not, and it's gonna start as false. I remember over here, this is when you log in. After you make a login, it asks if there was any error. If there is any error, let's set it equal to still false. It means that we're still not logged in. If we successfully logged in, let's just set it equal to true. So this is, I hope you guys are understanding. We created a variable called setLogin, and it's going to be false in the beginning. And if we log in, it's equal to true. If we don't log in, it's equal to false. And over here, I remember I asked for the login status. Oh no, this is the error over here. So we're gonna ask if we are logged in. So if we are logged in, then we want to basically just render a button. So we're gonna render a button over here. I'm going to close this so we don't receive any errors. And over inside of here, we want to initially just render button that's saying check if authenticated. So this is going to be a button. You can see that initially nothing happens, but if I try to log in, Pedro 5280, and I write 5280, the button should appear. So it didn't. Let me see what happened. For some reason, nothing appeared. Let me check. If login status, we did make the request. We should have actually received the data. Why didn't we receive the data? Let me check network. The request was not made. Let me try again. It was made, it was successful, but why aren't we actually receiving anything? This is weird. I'm gonna check to see what happened and I'll come back. Okay guys, I actually figured it out. Basically, previously I was asking if the data.message, which basically was a message saying you didn't log in, if it didn't happen, meaning that if it didn't work, then we would set the login status equals to false. But now what we want to ask is if response, so if response.data.auth is equal to false, meaning if we're not authenticated. This is what we passed over here, if you remember. So if you can see right here, we passed authentication, we passed a token, we passed everything. So let's come right here and let's say that let's pass the same thing over here, meaning that we're going to pass this equal to false. We're going to not pass any tokens because there wasn't any tokens. This is if no user exists, and we're also going to pass a message saying no user exists. Now let's do the same for this one right here. This used to be wrong username and password combination, so it's still going to be the same, but we're going to change this to wrong username password combination. By the way, if you're confused with the whole authorization process, I have other videos. I'm going to link both of them in the description, and if you want to check it out. But this video is focused specifically on authentication. This is why I'm not going over the other stuff. But you can see now we have if someone inputs a user that doesn't even exist, we receive a JSON with an object called authentication equal to false and a message saying no user exists. And if it also exists but the username and password are wrong, then we want to send the same thing but the message is different. And if it exists, it's going to send that authentication is equal to true, meaning that if we want to send our authentication variable to be equal to false, we can just ask if response.data.auth is not true. Then if it is, then we could just say like we just want to set it equal to true. Let's save this, and now let's try to log in. Pedro 5280 and 5280 and log in. You can see now a button appears, meaning that we are correctly logged in. Let's also see if anything was console logged. Two objects were console logged, meaning that everything is working. We're receiving all of the information, including the token. So this is great. Now what we want to do is we want to create a function that will check to see if the user is authenticated if they click this button, right? So currently this button is just right here and nothing is happening to it, but we want to pass something. We want to pass a on-click event. We want to pass something called user authenticated. Like this is just an example of an API request that we might want to make that would check to see if the user has the correct token. So for example, we're going to create a function called user authenticated up here, and let's create it, I don't know, down here. Const user authenticated equals to this. Then we're going to create a function, and this function will make a simple xuse get request actually, and it's just going to make the request to the endpoint that we created previously. So let's just grab this, but it's obviously not going to be login. It's going to be, wait, let me try to copy again. We're going to paste it over here and change this to get user info, I think. User info. Wait, how do we call it? We called it is user auth. What a terrible name. So let's just paste it over here. So we're making the GET request to that endpoint. Then we're going to pass nothing actually. We're actually going to pass something. We're going to pass headers. And the headers we're going to pass is basically the token that we currently have. So let's save this, but let's also go to the end and say .then, because after the request we want to grab a response like always, and after we get the response, let's just come here to the bottom and I don't know, let's just console log the response. The response would be basically saying if we are logged in, then it would say, yo, you are authenticated, congrats. This is the basic response, right? So the idea is we want to pass some headers. What are these headers? Well, remember that we're requesting a header down here in the, I think it's in the verify, let me try. Yeah, in the verify JWT, the token is basically passed on a header called x-axis token. And this is what we want to create. We want to pass a header over here called x-axis token, and right over here we want to pass a token. But wait, we're not keeping track of the token. Well, this is what we're going to do now. Remember that if the user logs in, we have access to the data. We have access to the token including. So let's initially just create a variable called const. So actually, let's not do this. The idea is you don't want to keep the token into a state or something like that. Let's just put it in our local storage. This is what most people do, and I would recommend doing that, but also there's like arguments against it. Like there's many different debates on how you should store your JWTs. Let's say you want to store it into your local storage, so which is probably the most common one. So after you log in, you want to come here and say local storage dot set item. This is how you set an item, and you're gonna say token, and we're gonna set it equal to the response dot data. Let's see how it responds, right? Remember when we log in, we need to try this again. Let me actually do this, and let's try to log in again so we can see how our response returns. So 5280 and log in. You can see that it says we received a response saying data dot token. So we got to say data dot token. So set local storage, you can just say response dot data dot token. This is how we're getting our token. But one thing is important, and this is for some reason something that is important. When you get this token over here in the backend, for some reason it requires that you put this piece of text right here, which is the word bearer, and then a space, and then you add. Basically, the idea of this is that your token will be composed in the backend of the word bearer, a space, and then the token that we received over here. So it should actually be, you can see we received this token over here. It should be bearer, space, and this is how they're going to check in the backend. So this is how we're going to actually store it in our local storage. So now we just set our local storage item called token to be equal to a word bearer plus the token that we saved, and then we're gonna come here to our user authenticated, and instead of setting this equal to whatever, we're just gonna say local storage dot get item, and we're gonna get the item token. Okay, so if everything worked smoothly, it should be working. So let's come here and let's also remove all of the console logs that we had previously, because they're kind of unnecessary now. We had this one, we had this one. I just want to receive the console log saying yo, you are authenticated. So let's come right here, say Pedro 5280, then 5280. It shouldn't respond anything. Yeah, it didn't console log anything, but when I click on this, it should give us a response saying you failed to authenticate. Let's take a look at why this is happening. Well, the headers that we passed is, let me see, let's take a look at the request, right? So let's come here to network. We made a request called isUserAuth. The request was actually correct, but it says you failed to authenticate. Let's take a look at what headers we sent. It's saying that we sent, let me see, over here we sent x-axis token with a bearer and the token, so that's correct. Now let's check to see if our local storage has been correctly set. You can check for local storage over here, and let's also check for this. It actually didn't save anything, right? Okay, actually I didn't see it. It's over here. So the token is actually set on this in the local storage. So why isn't it working? Well, I'm gonna take a look to see why it isn't working, and I'll come back to explain it to you guys. Okay guys, I'm back, and for some reason everything I said about adding a bearer, it's actually unnecessary. So I'm gonna delete this. This is the token. We're gonna come right here, and the way to fix this, I don't understand why that didn't work. It used to be a problem for me. I might be confused on that thing, but basically you don't need to put bearer over here. Just pass the token, and that should be fine. It's usually I don't work on JWTs in this manner. Like, I mean, I usually work it on a little bit more different way, but I'll just say that this works right here. If we're setting the local storage item to the token directly, then we're passing the header saying access token. And now if we save this right here, we come here and say I'm going to open my console log, and if I say Pedro 5280 and I pass the password 5280 and I click login, you'll see that nothing appears. But then when I click on check if authenticated, it says, yo, you are authenticated, congrats. And that's great. It means it's working. It means now we are a user who is making API requests with the correct token. And now that we have that, the idea that you're authenticated, it's saved into your requests. And when you make other API requests, then that API request is automatically authenticated. So that's basically the idea. I don't know if this video was pretty long. I have no idea, but I don't want to make it so that JWTs are complicated. People have this misconception that it is something really complicated, but it is actually not. It's just keeping track to see if the user who is making an API request is actually the user saying that, like the user they are claiming to be. So this is something really important, and I hope you guys actually got the idea. I am responding to every single comment, so if you guys leave a comment down below with any questions, I will answer it. And yeah, if you guys could leave a like and comment down below and subscribe to see more, I would really appreciate it, and I hope you guys liked it. So I see you guys next time.